Hello and welcome to this virtual session. We're glad you can join us today. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items we'd like to go over with you now. Firstly, you can resize the webinar windows to cater to your viewing preferences. You can maximise, minimise and drag the windows to your preferred viewing size. If you look at the bottom middle of your screen, you can click on the widgets that you'll need to get the most out of this virtual experience. Secondly, Microsoft specialists are on hand to answer your questions in real time. So feel free to type in your questions using the Q&A window and we'll answer them as soon as we can. Lastly, we've provided some additional resources for you to supplement your learning. You can access them by clicking on the links in this section. Without further ado, I'll hand over to our speakers.
Welcome back to part 2 of Microsoft Azure Virtual Training Day, implementing a data lakehouse with Microsoft Fabric. In this part, we cover the final 3 sessions of the course. We start with session 4, working with Delta Lake Tables Microsoft Fabric. Session 5 covers Ingest Data with Dataflow Gen2 in Microsoft Fabric. And then finally, we wrap up part 2 and the event with using Data Factory Pipelines in Microsoft Fabric. In this session, we'll be focusing on working with Delta Lake Tables in Microsoft Fabric, where we'll expand on what we covered in the 3rd session, which was on Spark, and go into more depth on using Delta tables within Fabric. So let's get started with session 4. In this session, we'll start with understanding what Delta Lake is, and we'll cover how to create Delta tables using code in Spark. We'll then compare managed versus external tables and how to work with those tables in Spark. We'll then spend some time on data versioning and time travel. And lastly, we'll discuss how you can use Delta tables with streaming data. Let's get going on our first topic on working with Delta Lake tables in Microsoft Fabric. Delta Lake is an open source storage layer that adds relational database semantics to Spark-based data lake processing. Tables in Microsoft Fabric lakehouses are Delta tables, which is signified by the triangular delta icon on tables in the Lakehouse user interface. Delta tables are schema abstractions over data files that are stored in Delta format. For each table, the Lakehouse stores a folder containing Parquet data files and a Delta log folder in which transaction details are logged in a JSON format. These Delta tables support querying and modification, so you can select, insert, update, and delete rows of data in the same way you would in a relational database system. Because the transactions are logged, Delta tables support ACID transactions and versioning, which also allows for a feature called time travel. Delta tables can also be used in conjunction with streaming data as either a streaming data source or sink. Delta tables are a widely used format and are based on the Parquet file format, which is a very common format for ingestion pipelines. Additionally, you can use the SQL endpoint for the Microsoft Fabric Lakehouse to query Delta tables using SQL without having to go through Spark. When you create a table in a Microsoft Fabric Lakehouse, a Delta table is defined in the metastore for the Lakehouse, and the data for the table is stored in the underlying Parquet files for the table. With most interactive tools in the Microsoft Fabric environment, the details of mapping the table definition in the metastore to the underlying files are abstracted. However, when working with Apache Spark in a Lakehouse, you have greater control of the creation and management of Delta tables. One of the easiest ways to create a Delta table in Spark is to save a data frame in the Delta format. You can see this in this code example. You can also create Delta tables by using the Spark SQL create table statement. And you can also save the table explicitly by supplying a path and calling the save method. This last option will save your data in Delta format without creating a table definition in the metastore. This approach can be useful when you want to persist the results of data transformations performed in Spark in a file format, but you don't want to create a table object within Microsoft Fabric. In managed tables, the table definition in the metastore and the underlying data files are both managed by the Spark runtime for the Fabric Lakehouse. Deleting the table will also delete the underlying files from the table storage location for the Lakehouse. You can also create tables as external tables, in which the relational table definition in the metastore is mapped to a file storage location that is external to the table storage location in the Fabric Lakehouse. For example, the following code creates a managed table by using the save as table method. Because the Delta files are being saved in the tables folder by default, they become a managed table. In the next example, the table definition is created in the metastore. So the table is listed under the table's user interface for the Lakehouse, but the Parquet data files and JSON log files for the table are stored in the file storage location and will be shown in the files section in the Lakehouse Explorer pane. This is what makes it an external table. You can work with Delta tables or Delta format files to retrieve and modify data in multiple ways. You can use Spark SQL, which is the most common way to work with data in Delta tables in Spark. You can embed SQL statements in other languages that are supported by Spark, such as PySpark or Scala, by using the Spark SQL library. Alternatively, you can use the %% SQL magic command in a notebook to run SQL statements directly in the cell. Or you can use the Delta API to work with Delta files rather than using catalog tables. You can create an instance of a Delta table from a folder location containing files in Delta format, and then use the API to modify the data in the table. Remember that Delta tables use a log file to record all of the changes made to the data. This means that you can use the log transactions to view the history of these changes and retrieve older versions of the data, which is a feature known as time travel. To see the history of a Delta table, you can use the describe history SQL command. Delta tables also support streaming data, both as a streaming data source and as a destination, which is referred to as a sink. Spark includes native support for streaming data through Spark Structured Streaming, which is an API that is based on a boundless data frame in which streaming data is captured for processing. A Spark Structured Streaming data frame can read data from many different kinds of streaming sources, including network ports, real-time message brokering services, such as like event hubs, Azure Event Hubs or Kafka, or file system locations. Delta tables support streaming data ingestion and processing and can efficiently handle real-time data streams by providing scalable and fault-tolerant ingestion and processing capabilities. We can read from a Delta table by using the Spark read stream method. Streaming data can be continuously appended to a Delta Lake table, and the changes are automatically made available for querying. Delta Lake supports an append mode where new data is appended to the table. You can define input, source, schema, and output modes to configure the streaming job. Spark also provides mechanisms to handle late arriving data and updates in streaming scenarios. You can specify a watermark to discard old data and handle late arrivals. Additionally, Delta Lake supports merge operations to handle updates or upserts to existing data in the Delta Lake table. Delta Lake also provides features like progress reports, metrics, and transaction log management to help monitor and optimize streaming jobs. You can leverage these features to gain insights into the job execution and troubleshoot any issues that may arise. Delta Lake also allows you to manage the retention policy for data in the table by configuring the retention period or apply partitioning pruning to optimize storage costs. Delta Lake also supports table optimization operations such as vacuuming and optimizing the transaction log. That way we can improve query performance and manage storage efficiently. Now that we know a lot more about Delta tables, let's do a demo to see it in action. All right, so we're back in our Lakehouse, and one of the first things we're going to do is go get some data. So let's come over here to Files, and we're going to create a subfolder, and let's call this Products, so we have some data to work with. And in here, we're going to upload some data. So let's go get our products CSV. There we go. And get this uploaded. All right, now that that is uploaded, right, we can see that under products. There we go. See product CSV. Let's go and load this into Spark. So on this file, all right, oops, let's go open a brand new notebook first, do things in order. And then on the left-hand side, we can get rid of that first cell. On the left-hand side, we will go grab our products, grab the product CSV, and then using this little menu, load the data into Spark. All right, let's collapse this so we can see a little bit more, and let's see if that works okay. So hopefully we see the products data, and this is what we're going to be working with the next little bit. Of course, our session just had to start, so it takes a little bit longer the first time that our session starts, but things will be faster on that. All right, so products, pretty simple. Product ID, product name, categories, kind of standard, fairly standard product data. Okay, now after this, the point of this this demo is really about Delta. So let's get started with something fairly simple. Let's write this out as a Delta table. So our format here is going to be Delta instead. And then we're going to call the save as table. And in this one, this is going to be managed. Let's call this managed products. And why do we call it managed? Because it is a managed table. How do we know that? We're not specifying a path that is kind of outside of our default, right? So just saving it with our default path and everything. Let's see where that goes. So format Delta, save as table, manage products. And once this writes out, fair amount of data here. What we should see, there you go. Oh, I forgot, it wasn't displaying. I was waiting for it to display. What we should see over here is on the tables, we should see managed products, right? With the little Delta symbol and everything. So it's just that they said it's managed because it's in a spot, it's on a path that we're using for the table. So the tables path in our Lakehouse. All right, so next though, let's play with this a little bit more. Let's change the same one around, and we do the save as table. Let's call this external instead. And to really make this external, we're going to specify a path for this. So for path, we are going to put a kind of a placeholder here for a second. So grab a path. Let me just put some underscores and put this under external products. Now, why am I doing this? So before I run this, right, what is the path here? Well, there's actually kind of an easy way to go and grab the path. And that is if we go over to our files folder, we grab this, there's a copy ABFS, right? So that's our Azure blob file system path for this. That points to the file system. So this is not under tables, it's actually under files. So let's grab that, and we're going to come up here and we're going to replace this little section with that path. So this is going to be quite a bit longer, has the user and everything, but the path, OneLake, Fabric, Microsoft.com, Lakehouse.Lakehouse, and it happens to be, this first part is Lakehouse. The second part is the name of my Lakehouse, which I happen to call Lakehouse. Just so you know the file, the naming scheme in here. But then it's the files, directory, and then external products. Now, it's very similar to what we just did, except we're specifying a path. When we run this, it still runs. All right, so it succeeded. We come up to tables. Do we have anything different here? And yes, we do. We have external products, and it's going to look like it's under the tables, that tables folder, but it actually isn't, right? So, it has the looks like the table. Everything is really kind of represented here. But when we look at the some of the details, if we were to load in the data or anything, this is actually coming from the file system, which if we come down here and let's refresh this, we see the actual data down here, right? So this is what's meant by an external table, like we mentioned in our slide presentation. All right, so a few things with comparing it. Let's go a little bit further with actually seeing those differences, as I just mentioned. So let's come in and I do have some, just to save a little bit of typing. Let's describe both of these, right? So let's do this first one first. Save a little typing in here. We're going to describe the formatted managed products. Right, so we see all the data in here, and down here at the location. Right, if we expand this out a little bit, it's kind of hard to see, but it is. This location is really specifying that it's under. It's this managed table, so it's actually going to have that tables folder. You just can't quite see it because of the way it's formatted here. Now, if we do the same thing, right? And I know it's a little hard to see, but if we do the same thing with our external products, we should see, if we come down a little bit, kind of the same thing, but notice the location is actually a little bit different. It's using, the username that I have. The workspace name with one like, and then further down, of course, it is going to actually point to the external products path. So under files, and again, it's just kind of truncated here because of the column width for this. Okay, so actually, I should be able to. Let's go see if we can widen that out. These paths are quite long, so my screen, just to make sure everybody can see it, is zoomed in a little bit, so there we go. So that's what we're looking for right there. So files, and the other one would have been tables, right, for the path. Okay, so let's we're done at these. You notice that we can get rid of them with SQL as well. So let's go drop these. We don't need these anymore. And when we drop them, something that we mentioned in our presentation is that, once we drop them, we refresh here, no more tables. So the thing is that the managed products, the data is actually gone, right? It's no longer there. However, the external products are still sitting right here, right? And we can expand this and actually see the Parquet file and everything. So, a major difference between the managed tables and the external tables is that difference when we delete data. So definitely worth remembering about that. All right, let's play a little more. So let's come down. Let's do another cell in here. Let's get a little closer. So on this one, let's steal a little bit of more code. We're just going to create another table. And this table, very simple. So under files, external products, right, using Delta. So what's happening here is we're being very explicit with creating a table. Let me run this. We're being very explicit with creating a table. We're specifying an existing location, right? That is this folder that mentioned that, hey, all the data is still here. So once this runs, what we're actually doing is simply adding it back to the tables list as an external table with that Delta, Delta table format and everything. So, so it's there. It's just a matter of kind of linking the two. Very simple command to do it. So it's a great way to grab existing, Delta tables and simply add them back into the Lakehouse as a table. Now, after we do that, we can then go through and select from it. So, right, I'll do this. It's short enough that I can type. Oops, if my mouse wants to cooperate, there we go. Select star from, and the products table Apparently isn't populated quite yet in the IntelliSense, but we should be able to go and read that, no problem. And sure enough, we see the products table with all the data in it. So all we did was simply point to the that location for the data. All right, next up, let's look at versioning. So the data currently, right, exists. Let's go make a change to it, and then let's see if we can compare the old data versus the new data, see if we can actually track the changes on this. So let's do an update to the data. This is simply going to change the list price to be 90% of what it was. All right, so we're going to update all the products. All right, make that change where the category is mountain bikes. Simple enough. Right, in progress, we see the number of affected rows for this, so 32 rows have changed. So now the question is, can we see the history? So this is pretty easy for the next part. We're just going to describe, I'm going to use the Magic Command SQL. For some reason my mouse likes to keep moving on me. We're going to describe the history, right, for products. And let's give that a run. And hopefully what we see here is that there's two versions of the data. So we have the original. If you look at the times, the original starts at 0. And then as we make changes to the data, first version, second version. So we do have to consider maintaining this. So over time, if we have a lot of changes to this data, you can actually get into a lot of history, a lot of extra data, because all of this is being stored. So it is possible to prune it. In this case, we just want to see if we can compare the two. So a little more, we're going to read both of them. Let's get a new cell in here. Let's grab a bit of a longer chunk of code. And what we're going to do to see the different versions is we're going to use a slight change on reading the data. So there's two lines in here to see the current data and original data. Both are doing the spark.read, right, in the format. One is just loading the data just as is. So that's the current, right now, this is what the data looks like. But the bottom option, line number 8 here, has this extra option on it saying, I want to see the version as of, and then we can specify the version number in here. So we're going to go back to version 0, which is the original data. Both of these are going to be displayed out. So we're going to see the current data, and then we're going to see the original data as two tables. So let's give that a run and see if we can see versioning. This, by the way, this is also referred to as the time travel that we mentioned in the presentation part, right? So up at the top, and again, the first one is going to be the current data. The second one is the original. And so, of course, I'm a little zoomed in here. So let's come over. We want to see the prices and all the pricing. So the list price, the very top one, $3,059. If we come down to the second table, and this is the original. Remember, we marked the prices down. So the original is $3,300. So this is obviously higher. So the top one, the new data, is 90% of this one. So we can use that. And as soon as we load in a data frame, you can take old data, you can maybe rewrite it to the current data. So you can take the version history and actually maintain your data with it, right? So it's pretty effective for that. All right, next up. Let's look at streaming. Now, streaming is a very interesting process overall because there's really a lot going on with it. So this is going to be a pretty simple example of streaming. What we're going to do with this is we are going to create a stream. All right, so let me grab, it's actually a big long chunk here. Whoop. Right there. I'll show you what this code looks like. So what we're doing to start things off is we're kind of setting things up, right? Create a folder. So, files, we're going to create a folder called data and give it a structure, right? So we have a schema with it. And we're going to start reading this stream. So making a folder and start looking to see if there's any changes to it. maximum files per trigger. So if anybody drops any files into this folder, we're going to start reading it, right, with that. And, that JSON is schema is going to be applied. Now, once we do that, right, we're going to write some event to the folder, and the event that we're going to write is just device event. So device 1 status okay. Device 2 has an error, so it's just a bunch of devices. So think like IoT type information as it's going. So this first part is going to do the reads, and the bottom kind of half of this is going to simply save some data into that file system, right? And so what we're curious about at this point is, well, is it actually reading the data in? Okay. So when we run this, right, we get the source stream created. And, well, let's see if it's actually doing anything, because remember, this is loading into, right, a stream called IoT stream. Let's come down and just use another cell here and grab a little blurb of code. And what we're going to do in this one is we're going to kind of accomplish two things. We're going to go and take that stream, the IoT stream, right? So that's the one that's being read earlier, and we're going to write it out into Delta, right? So we're actually going to use this as a kind of a sink as well, and it's going to be written out to this Delta stream. Now, where's that? We're going to write it out to a table called IoT device data. So let's give this a go. And notice that source stream created, it's not displaying the data anything, because when we're doing streaming, think this is like an ongoing process. So this is still like listening for new files and everything. And we get the streaming to the Delta sync. So, did anything happen at this point? Well, if we go and look at the table, right? So let's come out and refresh this. Remember that last one created this IoT device data table. And we'll just do this in code, right? So here we go. So let's select everything from IoT device data and see if we actually have that data that we read earlier. Right? So hopefully what we get are all those devices with the OK status in there. And that's from further up. That was that little block of that JSON type data that represented IoT data. Okay, so there's 9 entries in this. 9 entries. Now, here's what kind of really makes a stream a stream. Is we are going to go and add another file to that data right here. So this data folder, this is where we're reading everything from, currently has this data text, right? That's where that the data we just read, where that was coming from. So we're going to write out another chunk of data there and see if it gets picked up and thrown into that Delta table that we just described. So let's go grab just enough code. I don't feel like typing it. There we go. Put this in. And this is really just to make more data, right? Similar to the other data. So device and the status and the data with it. And we are going to write it out as a file, moredata.txt. This is literally going to come over and put that file in that data folder. Now, what we're hoping for is that the streams read it from here and then write it into the IoT device data. So those other cells previously are still running. All right, let's give that a run. All right, so this is not doing anything directly with the table. Wrote it out okay, so true. And at this point, could we go and see the new data? So we're going to kind of do the basically the same thing that we did before. We're going to go and select from that IoT data. I can go up and run the previous cell, but just so you know, I'm not cheating in here. Let's do a brand new cell, IoT device data. Okay, so fingers crossed, are we going to get more than 9 rows? Sure enough, we do. So the new data is actually represented in here as well. And that's the whole point of streaming. So within a notebook, it can be sitting there and really listening to all kinds of different stream bits of data. So in this case, we happen to be using the file system to read from, and we're using a Delta table to write to. But the point is we can be doing this all over the place with different types of streams, whether the Delta table is the data source or the sink, like it is in this case, really doesn't matter too much. It's just, it's much more that it's dynamic. Okay. With that, one little tiny thing before we finish this up, as a good reminder, don't forget to take your streams and stop them, right? Because they're actually still running. And so it's a good idea to, when you're done with them, give them a stop signal and they'll stop listening for that data. Okay, so with that, I think we're good to return back to our session and wrap up. For more information on the topics we've discussed in this session, you can check out the online material on Microsoft Learn, which you can find with the URL https://aka.ms/fabric-delta. In this session, we covered how to work with Delta Lake tables in Microsoft Fabric. We started by understanding what Delta Lake is. Then we examined how to create Delta tables using code in Spark. We compared managed to external tables, as well as how to work with those tables in Spark. We then spent some time on data versioning and time travel, and then finished things off with how you can use Delta tables with streaming data. We'll now take a 10-minute break. See everyone back here when we get started with session 5, Ingest Data with Dataflow Gen2 in Microsoft Fabric. Welcome back from the break. In this session, we'll be focusing on ingesting data with Dataflow Gen2 in Microsoft Fabric. So let's get started with session 5. We'll start things off with understanding what data flows are, followed by what the benefits and limitations are for them. We'll then explore how Dataflow Gen2 are used within Microsoft Fabric, and then we'll finish by examining how Dataflow Gen2 and pipelines are integrated within Fabric as well. So let's get started on our first topic in our session on ingesting data with Dataflow Gen2 in Microsoft Fabric. There are two primary high-level features Data Factory implements: data flows and pipelines. Dataflow Gen2 enable you to leverage a low-code interface and 300 plus data and AI-based transformations, letting you transform data easier and with more flexibility than any other tool. Data pipelines enable you to leverage rich, out-of-the-box data orchestration capabilities to compose flexible data workflows that meet your enterprise needs. So, data flows are used to direct the flow of data specifically, while pipelines are used to coordinate the various high-level tasks that might be needed beyond just moving data. Data flows are a type of cloud-based ETL, extract, transform, load tool for building and executing scalable data transformation processes. Dataflow Gen2 allows you to extract data from various sources, transform it using a wide range of transformation operations, and then load the results into a destination or sink. This is all done through a visual interface rather than a code interface like Spark. Data flows allow you to promote reusable ETL logic that prevents the need to create more connections to your data source. Also, data flows can be run manually on a refresh schedule or as part of a data pipeline orchestration. So how does Gen 2 differ from Gen 1? Dataflow Gen 2 in Fabric is the evolution of Dataflow, redesigned from the ground up with a more powerful compute engine and better data movement capabilities to help you load data to several Fabric and Azure Data destinations. Dataflow Gen 2 is only available in Fabric and are not available in Power BI without a Fabric license or trial. There's more than one way to do ETL or ELT in Microsoft Fabric, so it's important to realize the benefits and limitations of Dataflow Gen 2. First, Dataflow Gen 2 can allow self-service users access to a subset of data rather than requiring access to the entire set of data. They're also performance optimized and can help reduce refresh times for slower data sources. Restricting direct access by using data flows can also help hide the underlying data source complexity, and they can perform all of the ETL or ELT type processes and do it in a consistent and repeatable manner. So lots of good things. There are also some limitations though. They're not a replacement for a data warehouse. They don't support row-level security, and Fabric capacity workspaces are required in order to support them. Let's explore Gen 2 data flows in Microsoft Fabric, starting with the Power Query ribbon. Dataflow Gen 2 support a wide variety of data source connectors. Common sources include cloud and on-premises relational databases, Excel or flat files, SharePoint, Salesforce, Spark, and of course, Fabric Lakehouses. Once we retrieve the data from one of these data sources, there are a number of data transformations that are available to you, such as filter and sort rows, pivot, on pivot, merge, and append queries, split, conditional splits, replace values, remove duplicates, add, rename, reorder, delete columns, rank and calculating a percentage, top end, bottom end, and many, many others. The queries pane shows you the different data sources, which are referred to as queries here. The diagram view allows you to visually see how the data sources are connected and the different applied transformations. This can be also turned on and off on the View tab of the ribbon. The data preview pane only shows a subset of data to allow you to see which transformations you should make and how they affect the data. You can also interact with the preview pane by dragging and dropping columns to change order or right-clicking on columns to filter or make changes. The Query Settings pane primarily includes applied steps. Each transformation you do is tied to a step, some of which are automatically applied when you connect to the data source. Depending on the complexity of the transformations, you may have several applied steps for each query. While this visual interface might be helpful, you can also view the M code through the advanced editor. The combination of data flows and pipelines is useful when you need to perform additional operations on the transformed data. Pipelines are covered in detail in the next session. Data pipelines are easily created in Data Factory and data engineering workloads. Pipelines are a common concept in data engineering and offer a wide variety of activities to orchestrate. You can include a number of common activities in a pipeline, such as copy data, incorporate a data flow, add a notebook, get metadata, or maybe execute a script, or maybe a stored procedure. Pipelines provide a visual way to complete activities in a specific order. You can use a data flow for data ingestion and transformation, and then land that data into a lakehouse. Then you can add the data flow into a pipeline to orchestrate extra activities, like maybe execute scripts or store procedures before and or after the data flow has completed, to do things like cleanup and activities like that. Now that we've explored data flows a bit, let's see them in action with a demo. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do in here is we're going to go and open up our workspace. We already have one created with a lakehouse. But right on the workspace pane, we're going to come in and we are going to make our Dataflow Gen2. Wait for this to open up. And as soon as this opens up, it gives you a few options to import your data from, as well as you can get data from other sources if you want. For us, we're going to import it from a text CSV file. So let's start there. And for this one, we're going to grab it from a URL. Now, I already have a URL in here, so I'm going to paste that in. Basically, this is going to be just an orders CSV. And for anybody that's watching this, of course, you might want to have the whole thing. So this is just some GitHub content right from the Microsoft Learning content. So you can find that there. All right, and as far as the credentials to get here, it is just open, so we can get there with just anonymous authentication. We don't really need anything else here. Create a new connection is going to be fine. So let's move into the next pane. We can preview the data, and that looks correct. We also have the header information, and we can change this up a little bit if we want to. So like things like the delimiter and all that, we can make sure that this is correct, and then we can go ahead and create it. Now, once we have this Power Query view, what we can do is manipulate this data. And so what we're going to do is add some columns. So let's go over to the Add Column tab. And we are going to add a couple of custom columns. And so the first one that we're going to add will be the month number, because a lot of the times we do prefer to see months as numbers when we're trying to do reporting. The data type on this, of course, is going to be just a whole number. And we are going to base this on a formula. So we're going to base it on the date, the order date, right? So let's grab the date month and then grab, it is the order date that's there. And see if that adds okay. All right, so sure, we have the month number now. Looks pretty good. All right, next, we're going to come back to this pane. And I just wanted to point out this part, the applied steps in here. Once we added this custom month, all of the applied steps are actually showing it over here on the right-hand side under the query settings. So it is interesting that we can go back, right? And we can remove any of the steps if we want to. So it's a nice way to edit what you're doing. All right, once we have that, let's go and point this somewhere. So we are going to go back to the Home tab, and we're going to add a data destination for this. So let's point this to the Lakehouse. So again, we want a data flow to bring some data in, and so we're taking it from that URL and bringing it to this Lakehouse. So the Lakehouse we already have, right? This is one that we currently have in here. So we're signed in the right account. We're going to do a new connection. That's going to be all fine. And the data destination, once it logs in, sees the Lakehouse that we have. And right in here, we can pick which Lakehouse. So I have one DP601 demos, and we can name the table. Now this is just going to pick up the name of the file, but we can change that if we want to. Order is going to be fine for what we're doing in here. All right, so let's get this going. All right. Oh, I did need to select my Lakehouse. There we go. And let's go next. Now, one of the things on this that you do want to kind of consider what's going on when you're importing everything, because the table could already exist, and so the default tends to be to replace the existing data. We don't want to do that. We actually want to append the data. So if it does exist, we're just going to add to it. And then the other thing we want to do, and I know my screen's zoomed in a little bit for the presentation, but we do want to double check that everything's being mapped okay. So, for example, things like order date, you notice that it's the source type is date, it's destination is going in as a date. And we just want to make sure that everything's kind of lined up okay here. And we see that the month number and all that is. Now, if they're not, sometimes we just have to make some adjustments, like maybe dictating what the source type is, or doing something downstream to change the data. All right, so this is actually okay. Actually, let me go back on the order date, because it's coming in as a date. We actually want that to be modified as a date time. So let's go back to our data. And if we did need to change anything, just a matter of coming back to our actual data here, and then we can change the types. So for this one, the type of this data, instead of being date, we're going to switch this to a date time. All right, so now we see the time values as well. And now we're going to go back into add that data destination. Now, we already went through this, so sometimes if you already have a destination, you're just going to see it, right? That new connection was created to the Lakehouse. If that's not correct, we want to do something else, we can go to a new connection. So we're just going to go back to the same one that we configured. And again, make sure we're pointing it to our Lakehouse, orders for the table name. And on this last screen, again, we want to just double check all the settings. So we want to switch this to append because we want to keep that. And notice now the order date, when it's being loaded in, it's going to be a date time when it comes into the destination. And that's one of the things that we're looking for. And also the other one that we added, month number, because I set that as a whole number earlier, it is being picked up as a whole number for the destination as well. So that looks pretty good. So let's save that. And once we do that, we do need to publish all this. So this is really kind of sitting in the interface right now. And in order to make it live in the environment, we are going to click Publish in the bottom right-hand corner. And we get our data flow. So currently it's just data flow 1. You can see that it's still publishing. All right, now that the data flow is published, let's come over and we're going to rename it. So we can go in here to the properties and let's rename this to something more appropriate. In this case, it's maybe something like import orders, and we can give it a description so other people can see what it's about, and let's save that. So we'll use that for later on. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is we want to really drive this. And one of the best ways to do this is going to be with a data pipeline. In our next session, we're going to be talking more about pipelines. So this one's going to be a fairly brief introduction to it. But when we get into the pipeline interface, we're going to see that we can actually do a lot in here. But what we're going to do is really just drive that data flow that we just made. So I'm going to rename this pipeline, new pipeline, load data. And we're going to see the pipeline interface for the first time. In this session, what we're going to do is we're going to add an activity. So the pipeline activity that we're going to add is going to be the data flow that we just did in the previous part of this demo. So we have a data flow activity. We can rename it here if we want to. What we called the other one was import orders. And then for the settings, we're simply going to pick the data flow that we want to execute. So this data flow here is the one that we just finished creating. Now, once we've done all that, all this is really going to do is to kick off the that data flow that we just designed. So this is really designed to be much more the execution engine, to orchestrate all these different activities. In this case, we only have the one activity, so data flow should be pretty good. We do like to validate these pipelines, make sure we got all of the right settings, make sure we didn't miss any settings. So this looks good, no errors were found. And then we can go ahead and run it. So let's save that and run. All right, and we're just waiting for this to execute. We can see it's running. And down at the bottom of the screen, once it kicks in, you'll see the status of it. So it's currently in progress. And we're just going to wait a tiny bit for this to finish executing its job. There we go. So now that it's succeeded, we should be able to go back to our workspace, and we'll go over to our Lakehouse, because remember the data flow, the destination was to drop files into this Lakehouse. And what we should see, right, we see the Delta Lake files in here. And this is just, we got here a little bit fast. So let's just refresh this. And I said files, it's actually, it was, the destination was a Delta Lake table. And so we can work with this, right? So we see it there, and we're good. All right, so let's just see, make sure this works okay. So I want to open it in a notebook maybe. Open it in a new notebook. And you notice that we can use this all over the place. It is a Delta table like we've seen in the previous sessions. And so we can get to using it in other places. I'll just take a minute for the session to start, and then you'll see hopefully all of our data there. And there it is, right? Including, come down a little bit, scroll over. We should see our month number that we added in the data flow. So great. All right, let's get back to our presentation. For more information on the topics we've discussed in this session, you can check out the online material on Microsoft Learn, which you can find with the URL https://aka.ms/fabric-dataflow. In this session, We started things off with understanding what data flows are, followed by what the benefits and limitations are for them. We then explored how Dataflow Gen2 are used within Microsoft Fabric. And then we examined how Dataflow Gen2 and pipelines are integrated together in Microsoft Fabric. Now I'll take a 10-minute break. See everyone back here then, where we will start session 6, Use Data Factory Pipelines in Microsoft Fabric. Welcome back from the break. In this last and final section in our event, we'll be covering Data Factory Pipelines in Microsoft Fabric. Pipelines are incredibly useful to orchestrate the activities that you need to complete for various data analytic processes. Let's get started with session 6. More specifically, in this session, we'll be starting by introducing pipelines in Microsoft Fabric. We'll then cover 2 common activities, the copy data activity, and how to create pipelines from pipeline templates. Lastly, we'll discuss how we can run and monitor pipelines in Microsoft Fabric. So let's get started on our first topic in our session on using Data Factory pipelines in Microsoft Fabric. As we discussed in the previous session, there are 2 primary high-level features Data Factory implement: data flows and pipelines. Data pipelines are about orchestrating the various activities that you might need to complete for data analytics. Dataflow Gen2 are about moving and transforming data. These enable you to leverage a low-code interface and 300 plus data and AI-based transformations, letting you transform data easier and with more flexibility than any other tool. You can use a pipeline to define data transfer and transformation activities and orchestrate these activities through control flow activities that manage branching, looping, and other typical processing logic. The graphical pipeline canvas in the Fabric user interface enables you to build complex pipelines with minimal or no coding required. Activities are the executable tasks in a pipeline. You can define a flow of activities by connecting them in a sequence. The outcome of a particular activity, success, failure, or completion, can be used to direct the flow to the next activity in the sequence. There are also 2 broad categories of activities in a pipeline. Data transformation activities, which encapsulate data transfer operations, including simple copy data activities that extract data from a source and load it to a destination, and more complex data flow activities that encapsulate Dataflow Gen2 that apply transformations to the data as it's transferred, and control flow activities, which are activities that you can use to implement loops, conditional branching, or manage variables and parameter values. Pipelines also support parameters, which allow you to modify the execution of a pipeline dynamically. And pipeline runs are used to monitor and review when and what happened during a particular execution of when we've executed a pipeline. The copy data activity is one of the most common uses of a data pipeline. Many pipelines consist of a single copy data activity that is used to ingest data from an external source into a Lakehouse file or table. The copy data tool appears when you add a copy data activity to a pipeline. A graphical tool takes you through the steps required to configure the data source and destination for the copy operation. A wide range of source connections are supported, making it possible to ingest data from most common sources. After you've added a copy data activity to a pipeline, you can select it in the pipeline canvas and edit its settings in the pane underneath. Use the copy data activity when you need to copy data directly between a supported source and destination without applying any big transformations, or when you want to import the raw data and apply transformations later in pipeline activities. If you need to apply transformations to the data as it is ingested, or merge data from multiple sources, consider using a data flow activity to run a Dataflow Gen2. You can use the Power Query user interface and define a Dataflow Gen2 that includes multiple transformation steps and include it in the pipeline. There are many common pipeline scenarios for which Microsoft Fabric includes predefined pipeline templates that you can use and customize as required. This can help reduce the time it takes to create a brand new pipeline. To create a pipeline based on a template, select the Choose a Task to Start tile in a new pipeline. When you've completed a pipeline, you can use the validate option to check to see if it's configured okay. And then you can either run it interactively or specify a schedule. The Run button will manually trigger a data pipeline run. When you schedule a data pipeline run, you can choose the frequency that your pipeline runs. Select Schedule, found in the top banner of the Home tab to view all of your options there. By default, your data pipeline won't be set on a schedule. When you view a pipeline run history from the Workspace page, you can select the run start value to see the details of an individual run, including the option to view the individual execution time for each activity as a Gantt chart. Now that we've introduced some of the basics about pipelines, let's go see them in action with the demo. All right, so let's start things off with jumping back into our Lakehouse. And just to start things off, we're going to make a brand new folder, subfolder for our files. And we're going to call that, how about new data? Let's get that created. And then we're going to go over to our workspace and we're going to make a new pipeline. So let's come back to our workspace and we'll come back up to new here and we're going to make a brand new data pipeline. And when this pops up, we're going to call this ingest sales data. And let's create that. There we go. Now, when this pops up, of course, we have a few options. We can go right into adding pipeline activities. We'll do that sort of in the next part of this demo. But we can make things kind of simple. If we're not doing anything too extravagant, so if things are fairly simple, we can go into this copy data and it's going to kick off basically a wizard for us. And the idea here is that it's really something that's simple that we can take data from one place and just move it to another place. And so for this one, that's exactly what we're going to do to start off with these. Now, when we do this, the copy data wizard shows a lot of different data sources that we can do. And lots of sample data that you can get started with to play with. We come down here a little bit, lots of other data sources from all over the place. And, we mentioned before, there's, hundreds of data sources that we can actually consume in here. And the one that we want to do, specifically is we want the generic protocol. So just the HTTP protocols. So let's come over a little bit and filter this because it's kind of a long list. Generic protocol, we're just going to do HTTP. And once we have that selected, we can go to the next page where we're going to make a brand new connection for this. And we have a URL that we're going to use to get our data. And so this is going to be, not that one. Let's go get the right URL. There we go. So this will be sales data. Again, we're just pulling this from online, right? So this is just some online content from our Microsoft Learning content. And we can leave the connection to be named. The credentials in here, DP601 demo. It's kind of what we had before. That's going to be fine. And once we move into the next pane, it does give us a lot of options to change how we're pulling this data. So we just want to double check some of the settings. It is in fact a get method that we want to use. If we don't need to supply any additional headers for this. And this should all be good. Let's go next. We're going to just verify the format for everything. So it is in fact delimited text that we're pulling. And notice there is a detect, and we can preview this data as well to make sure we're getting the right stuff. For the row limiter, that actually is pretty fine, but we just really need it to be just the line feed. And the first row is header for this one. This data does have it, and we could preview the data. Let's go preview the data, and we'll see that it does in fact see that the column headers are in the data, right? So it's picking that up okay, and that's where that's coming from. So first row is header, looks good. It's not compressed or anything, so that all those settings are great. Now, where are we putting it to? So choosing the destination, well, we just really want the Lakehouse that we're using before, right? So in this case, we're going to come over to the workspace and grab our Lakehouse. And on the next pane, we're going to pick which Lakehouse it is. So I have a Lakehouse here called Lakehouse. Great naming scheme, but it is the Lakehouse that we have in this demo. So and next. All right, where is this going to go and how is it going to work? So, the root folder, we don't want it over in tables. We actually want it in files for this one. We're going to just dump it in the file system. And as far as the file name goes, we are going to call this sales.csv. And the folder path name, we're going to put that into that new data folder that we created when we first started the demo. Copy behavior, in this case, we can leave that as none. This will allow you to do a few things like merging files and do some more advanced stuff with the data. But we don't need to do that for this one, and we should be good. As far as the file format goes, this I think is all okay. Yeah, I'm going to change this to just the line feed again. Add header to the file. That's going to be fun. No compression. So we can leave that blank and we should be good. Okay, so once we do this, starting the data transfer immediately, when we save and run it, it's going to grab the data from online, move it in Lakehouse. So this whole wizard is in fact creating a pipeline with one activity on it. This copy, and you notice the name on here, it puts a suffix at the end of it just automatically, but it's one activity in the pipeline that just got triggered to go and execute, right? So the execution, right, running along here. And I look at the run history. All right, we're still waiting for this to go. And we could go over to the monitoring hub and take a peek to see how it's running as well. So but we'll just leave this go. This shouldn't take too long. It does take a little bit for the compute to start up and execute. So we'll wait for that to run. All right, so as it's starting, you can see on the output down below, we see kind of what's going on a little bit. So it's currently queued and run start, as well as the activity run ID. So there's a lot that we can do for monitoring, but this is a pretty simple one, so we're just going to wait. There we go. Now that it's succeeded, why don't we venture over to our Lakehouse and see if we have any data here under new data, right? So let's select that. And sure enough, we have the sales CSV. And if we open this up, we see our data, which is good. All right. So now that we have the sales data there, let's go and create a notebook to do something a little bit different. We're going to parameterize it, but we're going to use this data within the notebook, move the data using the notebook, but we're going to drive the notebook with a pipeline. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, we're going to take a peek at what that looks like. So let's go back to our Lakehouse here, and we're already on. Let's make a brand new notebook. And the purpose of this notebook, even though it could really, do the work, is we're going to use this within an activity in the pipeline. So we want the activity to use this as one of the things it's going to orchestrate. All right. So one of the first things we're going to add to this is I want to add a variable here for the table name, and you'll actually see this get used here shortly. Right. So table name equals sales. And we're going to use this as a variable in our notebook, but I also want this table name to be changeable from any external process that might run this notebook, namely our pipeline that we're going to do in a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into a parameter. And in order to do that, we're going to toggle this cell as a parameter cell. And so in the top right-hand corner above your cell, on the menu, we'll choose this toggle parameter cell. And what this is going to allow is, things like pipelines and anything really external can specify the value and actually override the value that we set here. So essentially, the sales value that the table name is being set to is now a default value. And we're going to see this with the activities. We're going to specify a different value for this. Now, we actually want this notebook to do some work as well. So at this point, we're going to add some more code. So let's make another cell. And this code's a little bit longer, so I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to go and copy our code in here, and I'll explain what it's doing. So this cell, all that it's really doing is it's going to read the data from our Lakehouse. So on the left-hand side, you can see the where we had our sales data. So files, new data, right? And this is what we just created. This is going to read that in as a data frame. And then we're going to take that data frame, we're going to manipulate it a bit. So we're going to add month and year columns just based from the order date. This we saw in one of our earlier sessions on Spark. And we're going to split the customer name. So we have a first name and last name. And then we're going to filter and reorder some of the columns, right? So let me go over to the right here a little bit and see all the columns that we're really getting. And then the very last thing is we're going to write this out as a delta table, right? So format delta, mode is going to be append, but this last part, we're going to save it as a table that's going to be named based on a variable. And that's that table name variable that we declared in the very first cell, which is now a parameter. So somebody could supply a different table name than the default one sales there. Okay, so with that I think looks good. Let's give that a go and let's run that and see if it works okay. So depending on whether your session is already running, right? If it needs to start, it can take a little bit longer to start the very first time. So I think that's the case here. And then we should see some output. It's always a good thing, good idea to test your notebooks before you put them into something like a pipeline, because it can be much harder to troubleshoot once they're in something like that. All right, so that looks like it succeeded okay. Let's come over and expand our tables. All right, let's come back to the Lakehouse. And there we go, right? So just a little refresh there. So under the tables, we now have our sales table here. And should be able to see the data. There we go. All right, so now we have the data. The next part that we want to do is we want to come over and modify our pipeline. So let's come into our workspace, and we're going to go back to the ingest sales data. Okay. And we're going to change the activities in here that we want. So what we're going to do is add a few more things. And one of the first things we're going to add is way over here for more activities, a little plus sign. Usually you'll see this as more activities when you're on a slightly smaller screen. And so we're going to come down to grab the delete data. And one of the things about the activities, and this is really neat, is we can take this activity, the delete data, we'll configure it, but we're going to connect, we're going to orchestrate which activities go first and which ones go second. So let's get this configured first, and then we'll do that. So we'll leave the name. The source that we want to delete is going to be in our workspace, and we're going to grab the Lakehouse that we're currently using. My Lakehouse is called Lakehouse. And we want to get rid of files, everything in the new data directory that we're dealing with. Remember, the copied data was the one that was grabbing data from the URL and downloading it basically into this folder. And so we're going to erase everything in the folder, right? All the CSV files in the folder first, right? Recursive is going to be fine. And that should be pretty good. Oh, that should be a wildcard path because we have a wildcard in it, right? So our wildcard name is this one. And all right, that should be pretty good. We don't need to do any logging on this, so we're just going to disable it. This is going to be a pretty simple one. So this looks like it's configured okay. Notice that all the tabs, initially they had a little red star beside the tab as we're going through. Now that they have all the required settings, all of those little red asterisks disappear. All right, so now we want to make sure that the order of these two activities are coordinated, right? Currently, if we were to run this, both of these activities would just run in parallel, and we don't want that to happen. We want the delete data activity to run prior to the copy data activity. So we're going to take one of these little arrows, right, on the right-hand side, and this is going to set a precedence between these two. And the one that I'm grabbing, right, there we go. The one that I'm grabbing is a little blue arrow, which is on completion. There's arrows for on success, on fail, as well as on skip if this task were to be skipped. But in this case, we don't really care if it succeeds or not because maybe the files aren't there, anything like that. And say, okay, as long as we tried to delete anything that's there, and then we're going to go through and do the copy, right? So it's going to coordinate those two things. Now, we do want to do a little bit more because, of course, what we want to do after that, once the data gets copied into that new data folder, we then want the notebook to turn around and update to append that delta table. And that was the notebook that we just created. So in this one, what we're going to do is create another activity, right? So we're still on the activities tab here. This activity is a little more common, so it's right up here. It's not under the more. So grab the notebook. We can call that whatever you want. And so let's do something like load sales notebook. And then the settings for this is really just specifying what notebook we want to run. So we had that load sales in there. Now, if you recall, we also had a parameter in the notebook, right? And that was that table name. So as long as you know the parameter, we're going to come down here and say we want to pass a parameter value into it that's a little bit different. We do need to know it. So this happens to be table underscore name. What type is it? Right. This is low here, but this is just going to be a simple string. And the value for this, just to change it up from the initial value that's in that default value that's in the notebook, which was just sales, we're going to set this as new sales, right? So prior we had the sales table, now we should be getting a new sales delta table. All right, so that's configured okay. Again, we have the everything that we kind of need in there, right? So no more little red asterisks by the tabs. The next thing that we need to do is make sure that we have, again, the precedence being set. So after the copy data, we're going to drag this on completion over to the notebook. And now these should go in order. So the delete data activity will go first, then the copy activity, and then the notebook activity, and all hopefully nicely configured. All right, so with that, let's go give this a run. And of course, we can do this a few different ways. It's always good to validate these as well. Just make sure we didn't miss any settings. So that's a good sign. No errors were found. Let's make this go. So let's save and run. And this again will take a little bit of time, but you will see it on the output tab. So in this case here, there's going to be 3 different tasks, 3 different activities that are going to be executed. And hopefully these all run okay. We will see it on the output here shortly. And then we'll go look to see if we got the new table, the new delta table that we're expecting, that new sales. Right? All right, so here we go. Now, because we ran this previously, we have the compute and everything that's already running. So this does tend to go a little bit faster. So the delete data ran first, and then the copy ran after that. So these succeeded. That's a good sign. And we're just waiting for the notebook to run. So it takes a little bit more to run. So that's currently in progress now. And now it succeeded. All right, so, and it is possible to do things like, look at the output that's happened in these different stages. So we do have the ability to kind of troubleshoot and work through these. But in this case, we should be good to just come over to our Lakehouse, and we'll see if we have the data. And sure enough, we now have a new table here, new sales, right? Instead of the default one that we did the first time with our notebook was a sales table. We now have this new sales from the pipeline execution. Okay, so with that, there's a lot going on in this one, but hopefully everybody can see that between the different activities, things like data flows, right? Dataflow Gen2, looking at the ability of notebooks and using all the capacity of Spark and everything. And then the ability of pipelines to coordinate everything and make sure that all the different activities are going in order, running properly, and because we have those precedence constraints to do on completion or on success or on failure, we can really control and say, hey, if this activity fails, let's go in this direction, or if it succeeds, let's go in this direction. So you can actually coordinate a lot when it comes to what you need to do for your data analytics activities. Okay, with that, let's get back to our session and we'll wrap things up. For more information on the topics we've discussed in this session, you can check out the online material on Microsoft Learn, which you can find with the URL https://aka.ms/fabric-pipeline. This concludes our Microsoft Azure Virtual Training Day, implementing a data lakehouse with Microsoft Fabric event. Let's recap all of the content that we've seen. In part 1, we started with a session on using Microsoft Fabric for end-to-end data analytics. In the second session, we introduced the concept of a lakehouse in Microsoft Fabric and how to use and get started with them. In the third session, we explored how we can use Apache Spark within Microsoft Fabric to work with our data. We then started part 2 in our event with the fourth session, where we went further into the concept of Delta Lake tables in Fabric. In the fifth session, we covered how to ingest data using Dataflow Gen2. And then in this last session we just completed, we went further into how pipelines are used in Microsoft Fabric to coordinate and automate data processing activities. Thank you for attending, and we hope you enjoyed these sessions. Remember that there are many ways to continue your learning journey, such as Microsoft Learn, where we offer self-paced learning options. And be sure to check out the calendar for more Microsoft Virtual Training Day events.